Welcome to Asia Pacific Defence Reporter, your go-to source for cutting-edge security insights in the region. Get ready for rapid-fire analysis and commentary from the Asia Pacific with your host, Kim Bergman.
Hello and welcome back. There's more General Purpose Frigate stupidity to talk about in a moment, but let's just start with confirmation that Australia is giving, and I mean literally giving, $9.4 billion to US and UK shipbuilding companies with no refund clause. Now, this has come about because someone was finally able to pin down Vice Admiral Jonathon Mead, head of the Australian Submarine Agency, and ask a series of detailed questions about these absolutely unprecedented transfers. When I say unprecedented, it's because this enormous amount of money buys us almost nothing. It is our contribution to the industrial base of both countries, and the very flimsy justification is, as far as I can tell, that it will enable them to increase submarine production in the hope that they will be making so many of them that Australia will eventually be able to buy some. I've detailed before that the US needs to hit a build rate of at least 2.33 Virginia-class per year before there's any hope of Australia being sold to second-hand ones in the early 2030s. But there's no refund clause, which I think is an appalling oversight and is further evidence of just how poorly all of this is being managed. Now, in another area of public policy, imagine that an Australian government was caught out transferring to companies $9.4 billion for the construction of, let's say, a hospital or two, and it was found out that there was no refund clause, and companies just pocketed it and just turned around and said, well, too bad. You, the Australian taxpayer, are just going to accept that that's a loss. Now, a lot of this was exposed on the evening of Thursday, June 6th, and it has received very little reporting, which I find profoundly depressing. Anyway, it was once again Green Senator David Shoebridge who really put defence officials on the spot, and I encourage people to watch the video. You can get it online, because the written transcript does not do justice to how awkward and evasive Vice Admiral Mead was, repeatedly declining to answer numerous simple questions about a refund clause, saying robotically over and over again that the US is committed to the deal. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, that's really how puerile it all is. We are handing over $4.6 billion to the US because they say they are committed to it. And as I've said and written repeatedly, a lot of good people are fully committed to this, but that does not mean it will happen. Not only does submarine production need to substantially increase, but on top of that, a future US president has to legally certify that the sale to Australia will not detract from the capabilities of the USN, which to me sounds simply like a logical impossibility. And in the lead-up to Vice Admiral Mead's humiliation, Senator Shoebridge managed to extract the information from him and other officials that $1.6 billion will be transferred next financial year, followed by another $1.8 billion the year afterwards, and then the balance over the next 10 years. I mean, honestly, the Americans must be laughing, because on top of that, we are spending another $7 billion on facilities at HMAS Stirling in Western Australia, including 1,000 houses, and they are probably to a higher standard than Australian sailors and their families get for the rotational deployment of US and UK submarines, nuclear-powered submarines, from 2027. As an aside, when Australians are working on these US and UK submarines, will they be paid by those governments, or will this be another contribution for free of Australian labour, working labour, not Labor Party? And I look forward to more information about that being provided in the future. And now, in the course of this coming out, defence officials, including Vice Admiral Mead, said that the gift of the $4.7 billion to the US and a virtually identical amount to the UK was the result of an agreement. Okay, let's see it, because I'm starting to think that it doesn't actually exist. Former Senator Rex Patrick, submariner, and by the way, a past contributor to this magazine about a decade ago, he has been trying to get a copy of this supposed agreement via Freedom of Information laws and is getting nowhere, I suspect, because there's nothing there. But I should say now that Senator Shoebridge is on the case and sections of the media, I suspect there are now a few very nervous defence officials on the phone to Washington trying to cobble something together just in case they are dragged kicking and screaming back to the Senate to face more questions, as I think they almost certainly will at some point. Now, getting back to Vice Admiral Mead's cringeworthy performance, will that have an impact on his approach to this? I expect not one bit, because he and the other AUKUS boosters will simply tell themselves that critics just don't get AUKUS, and that only they are clever enough to have the strategic vision to see how wonderful all of this is. In other words, the rest of us not in the cult are traitors and idiots. I have the distinct impression that no one in the system, at least not in recent years, has ever criticised Vice Admiral Mead or questioned his judgment, and so when it finally happened, he was left completely floundering. Now, that's the level to which the defence debate has sunk, an appropriate term for submarines, and, to be very frank, a lot of the media aren't really helping either. It's received a few passing mentions, but one of the few journalists to report on this no refund clause debacle was Andrew Green from the ABC, who I know very well. We speak frequently. And next day he had a very accurate online piece about what had happened in the Senate the night before. On the same day, he also had another story, a minor one in my opinion, about a Tiger helicopter at a show on the Gold Coast having some smoke coming out of its engines. Now, which story did his editors prefer? Would anyone like to make a guess? Well, of course, it was the smoke coming out of the engine rather than Australian taxpayers giving away almost $10 billion in the hope that we will get some nuclear-powered submarines eventually. Now, when Defence were contacted about the smoke coming from the Tiger helicopter, the official response was it was due to a minor technical fault. Get that? Clearly, Defence are saying that the problem was with the helicopter. Minor technical fault. I can explain, no, it was not. That's a lie. It was pilot error, pure and simple. They skipped the pre-flight checklist and prematurely dumped fuel into a very hot engine, which of course ignited instantly and with a distinctive big puff of smoke. But Defence and Army lied, not mentioning that fact, and instead, once again, trying to deflect blame so that the Australian public have the view reinforced that there's something fundamentally wrong with these European-supplied helicopters and only US technology can save us. Now to the Goat Rodeo C-3000 General Purpose Frigates. I have previously explained that the independent review team into the Navy's surface fleet couldn't even get their basic design selections right. As well as the Korean Daegyu class, they should also have listed the Chungnam, which they failed to do. I've also pointed out that the Navantia Alpha 3000 probably shouldn't be on the list because it's a much smaller ship than the others. And on that one, my guess is that a very highly paid person somewhere has looked at the number 3000 and assumed it was the tonnage of the ship, which it definitely is not. The 3000 number seems to be a made-up marketing title, gimmick. Now, you would have thought, would you not, that dozens of highly paid defence staff and consultants would have picked up that simple error, but they didn't. Anyway, the shock for this week is I'm getting the feeling that the Daegyu frigates won't be part of the mix either. And the design that Hanwha Ocean will offer is a larger ship that they delivered to Thailand in 2019, built in South Korea. Pardon my appalling lack of tight pronunciation. It's the HTMS Bhumipol something. You can Google it. It's there. Now, Hanwha Ocean, of course, can't discuss this with me out of fear of being jailed. But there is a thing called the Internet, which I recommend to Defence and to the independent review team, that shows this ship is a derivative of a destroyer, and it has a number of features presumably attractive to Australia, most importantly the Saab 9LV combat management systems with consoles, I'm pretty sure, actually delivered from Adelaide. Now, if I'm right, I suspect that's yet another howler from Defence. The ITR specifically named the Daegu, but it looks like they couldn't even get that right. Now, when we look at the chain of command in all of this, a central figure is the head of Navy Capability Development, and I mentioned him in a previous podcast, last week I think it was, speaking total nonsense in the UK, seriously trying to argue that an off-the-shelf ship built for another navy could simultaneously meet all Australian requirements for certification and regulation. This position is so ridiculous, I'm sure I hardly need to labour the point. Anyway, a few people asked me if I know Admiral Stephen Hughes, that's who it is, and the answer to the best of my recollection is that we have never met. However, people might be interested to know that I knew his dad, Rear Admiral Oscar Hughes, in the 1980s and 1990s quite well. And I'm going to conclude most of this podcast with a positive story about how Navy used to behave before they transformed themselves into a US worshipping cult and when they were interested in having their ideas challenged. Now, Rear Admiral Oscar Hughes, he had a reputation of being very thorough, very tough, but also very fair. He was the project director for the Collins-class submarine, and he was very keen to discuss progress with me, first of all when I was a junior journalist, and then when I was a relatively junior ministerial staffer. It's called networking, and I recommend it to Defence senior leadership and ADF senior leadership. Anyway, one day in mid-1989, when I was working for Blom & Foss Australia on the Anzac frigate bid, he gave me a call and invited me to his office, which was in Anzac Park West, if I recall. Anyway, got there, always happy to get an update, a refresh on how the Collins program was going, even though I had no direct interest in it myself. He was just sort of doing it as a good citizen. And then, after a bit of a chat, he asked how the bid for the Anzac frigate project was coming together. And I, of course, was very happy to give him an enthusiastic overview, great team of people, highly motivated. And I mentioned that, I said, look, the timing on this is quite interesting because we have a few difficult issues to resolve about which combat system to baseline in our offer. And my ears really pricked up when he basically said, yes, I'm aware of that. So I explained to him the dilemma. The conservative Germans, Blom & Foss being a German-owned company, part of the Thyssen Group back then, they wanted a system, a combat system and sensors from the Dutch company Signal. That's how their name, Signal. Full name was HSA, now owned by Thales. Anyway, they are a very good company, located in Dutch horse country near the German border, and the other combat system that was in the running was from Peab in Sweden, and soon to become Celsius Tech in Sweden. Peab was actually part of the Philips group, as was Signal, by the way. Anyway, the issue for many of us was that the Swedish combat system looked to be better. The Dutch system we could bid with our ship was, from memory, something called Tacticos. And it was an expert version of SOWACO, I can't remember what SOWACO stood for, developed by the Royal Netherlands Navy and Signal for the Dutch M frigate, and the M frigate was our competition. It was Blom & Foss MECO versus the Dutch M frigate. Now, the Dutch, I hope this is making sense. the Dutch government would only agree to Suharto being supplied on a Dutch ship, not on a German one. Now, a few of us were aware that for a number of reasons, Tacticos was not as good as Suharto, and it had some weird elements, such as software modules written in an obscure and unsupportable language called RTL2. Now, meanwhile, with the Swedes, their programming language was all C or C++ or whatever was in fashion at the time. And another very important factor, it was considerably less expensive. Anyway, Oscar Hughes took the trouble to explain to me in a fair bit of detail that via the submarine program, the Royal Australian Navy was learning a great deal about Swedish technology, and by the by, they were impressed with what they were learning about their surface ship combat system work. Well, wow. By the way, probably the same information would have been conveyed to the other bidders, no reason for it not to be. Anyway, realizing the significance of what I heard, I drove straight away back to 32 Essington Street in Mitchell, where we're based, immediately saw my boss, the legendary Bernie Clark, who, by the way, put up with far more of my antics than a normal human being would. He also immediately realized the significance of what was going on and convened a meeting with our Amacon partners, which is Transfield by any other name, and asked me to run through all of this again, which I very happily did, probably to Tony Shepard. He was our, the bid manager, and a few others. And everyone realized the consequence of this. But back in Hamburg, back at Blomenfoss headquarters, the Germans, being Germans, would not budge. They had been planning to actually prime the whole bid, and they dug in their heels, saying they would only be prepared to warranty the system from the Dutch, not something from a bunch of upstart Vikings. Now, it's a hugely consequential decision because it affects not only the price, but it also the level of capability that you're offering the customer. Anyway, the result was that Transfield decided to prime the bid with the Celsius Tech system, and the rest is history. Blomenfoss got a very nice design fee and some ongoing work, but it was Transfield that took all of the commercial risk and did a very good job managing the project. Now, one of the great success stories of Australian industry, and frankly we don't have that many of them considering the huge amount of money that we spend on defence, is 9LV, the combat management system, now produced by Saab Systems in Adelaide, which forms the combat system backbone of the RAN surface fleet and which has had export success. I mentioned Thailand. It's also in Bulgaria, in the Bulgarian C-90 frigates. Now, wouldn't it be an irony if the son of the admiral, so influential in this great success story of 9LV, was now responsible for the destruction of the national capability that his dad helped to create? Have a think about that. I'm going to have a break for a week or two because I have some travel coming up. There'll be a whole lot more to discuss when I get back. I'm conscious of the fact that in these podcasts I've been giving Navy a hard time and Army a hard time for the destruction of $1 billion worth of high-tech helicopters. Air Force have gone off lightly. They've generally done, I believe, a better job. But there are some problems there, and that's just a bit of a teaser for an episode in probably a fortnight's time, where I'll be picking on one of their projects where they're not wasting billions of dollars, but they could have done a far better job. Okay, with that thought, I shall leave you. Thank you very much for listening, and see you next time. Bye for now.
That's today's Asia Pacific Defence Reporter. For more in-depth articles, expert opinions and exclusive interviews, visit AsiaPacificDefenceReporter.com. Stay informed, stay ahead. This is your source for all things defence. Until next time.